They said, "Don't clap. You're embarrassing." Just like that. Not even whispered, not softened by a smile or a laugh to pretend it was a joke. No, it was sharp, plain, like a ruler snapping down on a child's knuckles. I remember the way my hands froze midair, caught in the act of innocent applause, the sting of their words louder than the music. And I remember, even more painfully, how no one stood up for me. Not my son, not his wife, not even my granddaughter, who just turned her head as if she hadn't heard a thing. But she had. Of course she had. I saw the way her little shoulders tensed, the way her fingers gripped the edge of her sequined jacket, the one I'd complimented just 20 minutes earlier. She heard her mother shame me, and she chose silence. I don't blame her. Not really. She's 14, but silence has weight. And that night, it nearly crushed me. I'm 74 years old. I live alone in a small apartment complex for seniors just outside of Redmond, Oregon. The building smells like boiled eggs and lavender cleaner, the kind maintenance staff use when they want to hide the smell of loneliness. I have a little balcony where I grow petunias, a radio I keep tuned to the classical station, and a black upright Yamaha piano that no longer fits in my living room because my landlord wouldn't allow the wall to be knocked out during renovations. So instead, it sits in storage, 2 miles away, in a climate-controlled unit that costs me more than it should. I visit it twice a month, like a relative in a nursing home. I bring a folding chair and sheet music. I wipe the keys with a cloth before I play. I always start with the same song, My Funny Valentine. My husband used to hum it while I practiced. He's gone now, 15 years this past March, and when I play it alone, the notes sound hollow. But I play anyway, because some part of me still wants to believe that beauty has an echo, even in storage. The concert was supposed to be a treat. That's what my daughter-in-law called it. A community jazz night at the Cultural Center downtown. Nothing too fancy. Just a local singer with a small band. Tickets free for seniors and families. My granddaughter, Emily, had picked out my outfit. A silky blouse with pearl buttons and a pair of black slacks I hadn't worn since Derek's memorial. She curled my hair with the same iron she uses on hers. I watched her in the mirror, the way her brow furrowed in concentration. For a moment, I felt almost luminous. Not young, no, but something close to remembered. Like an old photo brought back into focus. We arrived 15 minutes early. The hall was warm, too warm, and smelled faintly of popcorn and cheap perfume. People were milling about with paper cups of wine and brochures printed in Comic Sans. There was a stage with fairy lights and a few rows of folding chairs lined up beneath a banner that read, "An Evening of Heart and Harmony." I was genuinely excited. I hadn't been to a live concert in years. When I was younger, I used to teach music, piano mostly, but I knew theory and voice well enough to coach a few talented teenagers through their auditions. Music wasn't just my job. It was my anchor. And now, in a world that felt like it had moved on without me, the idea of hearing live jazz again stirred something old and soft in me. The lights dimmed, and the singer stepped onto the stage. She was tall, mid-40s maybe, dressed in a navy jumpsuit with silver earrings that caught the light each time she turned her head. Her voice was deep, velvet, and smoke. And when she sang, it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like confession. The second song she sang was "Willow, Weep for Me." It's not one of the popular ones anymore. Too slow, too sad. But it hit me like a memory I hadn't prepared for. I felt my chest tighten, my throat burn. I remembered dancing in the kitchen with Derek in our bare feet, the way he'd hum that song into my neck. I closed my eyes and let it fill me. And when she finished, my hands came together on their own, instinctive, grateful. I clapped. Early. Alone. And that's when my daughter-in-law leaned in and said it. Don't clap, you're embarrassing. Not, oops. Not, wait for the end. Just that. Cold and clipped, like she was correcting a child who'd reached for candy before being told. And my son, who once used to sit on my lap while I taught him how to find middle C, he didn't say a word, didn't look at me, didn't offer even the smallest shield of kindness. He just shifted in his seat, adjusted his blazer like the room had suddenly become too tight. I didn't respond. I lowered my hands slowly, felt the heat creep up my neck. My chest began to pulse, not with anger, not yet, but with that familiar ache of being dismissed. Again. Of being seen not as a woman with memories and passions and years of service to beauty, but as a burden, an embarrassment, a detail to manage. The rest of the concert blurred after that. The singer performed a few more songs, each one met with timed applause, laughter from the crowd, the polite noises of well-behaved audiences. I stayed quiet. My granddaughter whispered something to her mother. They giggled. My son checked his phone twice. I sat still, back straight, eyes on the stage, hands folded in my lap, like I was being graded on posture. When the final song came, a slow, haunting rendition of The Nearness of You, I felt tears slip down my cheek. I didn't wipe them away. And then something happened. Something that split the night in two. The singer finished the song, bowed, then stepped to the microphone. She scanned the crowd, her eyes landing briefly, unmistakably, on me. And she said, "Before I go, I want to thank someone. A woman in the third row who reminded me why I do this." She clapped early. And she clapped like it mattered, like the music reached her. That's the kind of listener every artist dreams of. This last piece is for her. The room went quiet. Heads turned. My son stiffened. My daughter-in-law froze. And me, I blinked. Just blinked. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it, that the years had softened my hearing. But no. She was looking at me. Only me. She sang, "You Go to My Head," a song I used to teach with trembling reverence. And this time, when the final note faded, I didn't move. I didn't clap. I just looked at her, and she looked at me. Two women, generations apart, connected by something deeper than politeness or blood or obligation. Outside, after the show, no one spoke to me. Not really. My granddaughter was quiet. My son rushed to find the car. My daughter-in-law scrolled through her phone as we walked. "Well," she said finally, "that was unexpected." Her tone wasn't warm, it was defensive, like something had slipped from her control. I nodded, but said nothing. My hands still tingled from that almost clap. My heart beat in time with the music. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and wrote a letter. I didn't know if I'd send it. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was full of music, of memory, of thanks. Because someone saw me. Really saw me. And I would not let the people who didn't, who chose not to, be the only voices in the room. It didn't hit me until the next morning, not completely. That night, after the concert, I was too numb, too tightly wound in the discomfort of being driven home in silence. The radio played some peppy song I didn't recognize, the kind meant to fill the space so no one had to speak. My son focused on the road, his jaw tight, his eyes locked forward like he was trying to outrun the evening. Emily sat beside me in the back seat, picking at the hem of her skirt, not looking up. Carla was texting someone, her screen lighting up every few seconds. No one said goodnight when they dropped me off, just a quick wave from inside the car. No offers to walk me to the door. I used to be walked to the door. I used to be someone who warranted good nights and hugs and eyes that held mine a second longer. That night, I was just something to be returned, something they had carried and were glad to put down. But the next morning, as I sat with my tea and let the quiet of my apartment settle over me, I began to see it clearly. Not just the comment, not just the way Carla spat embarrassing like it was a curse word. No, it was everything beneath it, all the moments that came before that led to it being so easily said. The truth that I had become someone they felt they had to manage, contain, quiet. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was the fruit of long, slow erasure. I looked over at my side table where I'd left the program from the concert. It was crumpled slightly, the corner bent from where I had held it too tightly during the singer's final song. I smoothed it out and read the lineup again. Song titles, names of musicians, a little bio about the vocalist, whose name was Ruby Vale. It said she'd started singing in small bars and lounges, that she'd dedicated every set to her late grandmother, who taught her to harmonize by humming lullabies into her ear. I touched that sentence with my finger, lightly. That line about her grandmother. I wondered if Ruby had ever been told she was embarrassing. I doubted it. I hoped not. My phone vibrated once. A message from Carla. Thanks for coming last night. Hope you enjoyed yourself. Emily loved seeing you. No mention of what was said. No acknowledgement of the singer's dedication. Just a cool, transactional follow-up, the kind you send after brunch with a colleague. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry yet. I wasn't. Not fully. But because I didn't want to respond out of habit. I wanted to sit with the discomfort, not mute it with politeness. I spent most of that morning thinking, not just about the concert, but about everything it stirred up. The piano I hadn't touched in weeks, the birthday I'd spent alone this year, the family dinners that happened without me and were later described vaguely as last minute. There had been a time when I was central, not just useful, though I was that too, but seen, valued. I taught them all music, even Carla once, when she was still trying to impress me. Emily used to beg me to teach her the piano, and when she was little, she'd sit on the bench beside me and thump the low notes like she was summoning thunder. Now, the bench was gone. The keys were silent, and no one seemed to notice. Or if they noticed, they had decided I'd grown past it, like a toy you outgrow but feel guilty for throwing away. That night after dinner, I opened the storage unit. I hadn't planned to. I had gone for a walk, but something pulled me toward it, like the silence inside was waiting to speak. I unlocked the door, flipped on the light, and there it was, my piano, half covered in a cloth, sitting next to boxes labeled with other names. Holiday, books, Emily's drawings. I sat on the folding chair I kept tucked against the wall, pulled the cloth back, and stared at the keys. Dust had gathered on them. Not thick, but enough to show time had passed. I wiped them down, laid my hands gently on the ivory, and began to play. I didn't warm up, didn't check the pedals or adjust the chair. I just played. Slowly, softly. The melody came back like a ghost, something familiar and long forgotten, but not gone. Willow, weep for me. The same song Ruby had sung the night before. As I played, my chest tightened, not just with memory, but with the growing realization that the people I loved most in this world had no idea who I was anymore. Or maybe they did, and simply preferred the version of me that stayed quiet, clapped at the right time, and didn't cry at concerts. When I finished, I sat still for a long time. The silence in that storage unit was thick, like it knew things I didn't. And that's when it happened. Not a grand moment, not a revelation, but a decision. Small, simple, necessary. I opened my bag, pulled out a scrap of paper, and wrote a letter. To Ruby. I didn't know where to send it. I figured I'd find a mailing address through the community center or their website. The letter was short, but full. I told her I had been the woman in the third row, that I had clapped because something in me recognized something in her, that her voice had reached a part of me I thought no one could hear anymore. And I told her thank you. Not for the song, but for seeing me. That letter, writing it, folding it, sealing the envelope with trembling hands, was the beginning. It didn't feel like much, sitting there on the lid of an old shoebox. But I would look back on it later and realize it was the first thing I had done in a long time for myself, and only myself. 3 days passed before I found the address and dropped the letter in the mailbox. I didn't expect a response. I wasn't fishing for validation. I just wanted someone to know, someone who might understand. The next week, an envelope came addressed to me, handwritten, the name on the return corner unmistakable. Ruby Vale. I opened it with the reverence one reserves for keepsakes. The letter was written on thick cream paper in a swirling, warm script. Dear Margaret, it began, I know who you are. I saw you before you clapped. You were the first face I looked at when I stepped on stage, and the only one that didn't look at me like I was background noise. Your applause, it didn't embarrass me. It reminded me of why I sing. My grandmother would have done the same thing. She taught me to feel music, not just perform it. Thank you for showing me I was still being felt. Please come to my next show. I'd love to leave you tickets. My treat. I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. It had taken 4 sentences from a stranger to undo 4 years of slow, invisible dismissal. That night, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't read. I sat at the table with the letter open, the words lit by the soft lamp beside me, and I said aloud, not loudly, just clearly, they were wrong about me. And the room, as quiet as it had ever been, felt suddenly full, not of people, but of presence, of music, of promise. That was the moment. Not when I clapped. Not when she sang. Not even when she dedicated the song. It was after. When I was alone, but not lonely. When I realized that I didn't need their permission to matter. When I saw that what they had tried to shrink could stretch again, gently, with time and intention. I hadn't planned on going to the next concert, but now I would. Alone, if I had to. Maybe for the first time in decades, and I would clap when I wanted to, not just for the music, but for me. The invitation came by mail, in a square envelope that smelled faintly of paper glue and the faintest trace of perfume. Or maybe that was my imagination. Inside was a ticket, real cardstock, not the kind you print at home, with elegant lettering that read, "An evening with Ruby Vale, songs from the smoke." It was addressed personally. For Margaret, with warmth. The note tucked inside was brief, handwritten in the same curved script as her previous letter. "Come if you like. No pressure, just music. Yours, Ruby." I held the card in my hand for a long time. Not because I didn't know whether I would go, I knew the moment I saw it that I would, but because I wanted to savor what it meant. It meant someone remembered me. Not as a task, not as a burden, not as an obligation, but as a presence, a listener, a participant in the world. And that realization, quiet as it was, unsettled something in me that had been asleep for too long. The show was a week away. I kept the ticket on my kitchen table, under a glass bowl of clementines, as if I needed a daily reminder that something awaited me. Something that wasn't about being someone's mother or grandmother or the person you call when you need a ride or a casserole. Every time I passed it, I felt a flicker in my chest. Not excitement exactly, but anticipation. The kind I hadn't felt in years. I hadn't told anyone about the concert yet, and at first I thought I wouldn't. But the night before, Emily called. She called from her mother's phone, said hello with that teenage tone that always seemed half apology, half boredom. She said they'd be picking me up Sunday for dinner or something. And when I said I had plans, there was a pause on the line, so long I thought the call had dropped. "What kind of plans?" she asked finally. I hesitated, then told her. "A concert," I said. "I've been invited." She didn't say anything for a beat, then said, "Oh," in a voice I couldn't read. "With who?" "Just me," I replied. "A solo outing." She gave a soft laugh, not unkind, but surprised. "That's kind of cool," she said. "You don't usually—" And then she stopped herself. I waited. "You don't usually do stuff," she finished lamely. "I do," I said, not sharply, but firmly. Or at least I used to. I wanted to leave it there, but something inside me pushed forward. I'm starting to again. The next day, Carla showed up. Not unannounced exactly. She texted, and when I didn't reply right away, she arrived anyway. She brought a tub of lentil soup and that air of managerial compassion she wore like a cardigan. "Heard you're going to a concert," she said, as she placed the soup in the fridge without asking. "That's fun." I nodded. "Ruby invited me," I said, careful not to give away too much. Her eyebrows lifted. "The same singer from last week?" "Yes," I said. "She sent me a ticket." Carla smiled, the way you smile at someone who just told you they're taking up hang gliding at 74. That's sweet of her. Then she hesitated. "Do you want us to take you?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes were scanning, measuring. I shook my head. "No, I'm fine going on my own." "Well," she said, voice tight, "it's not really about being fine, Margaret. It's about safety. Late nights, crowded places." She let it trail off, then picked it up again with a forced chuckle. "You know how things are these days. People target older women. It's not like it used to be I didn't respond." There was nothing to say to that kind of invisible chain. She meant well, I told myself. That's what people always say when they want to stop you from moving. Daniel's just worried, she added. You've had some dizzy spells. I hadn't had one in over a year, and they knew that. But the way she said it, like it was a current reality, not a past condition, told me everything I needed to know. They had a narrative, and I had wandered outside it. They were trying to gently pull me back. I didn't tell them the concert was being held in the very same hall as the last one, that I had already arranged a ride through a local senior shuttle service, that I'd planned my outfit 3 days ago and set my shoes by the door. Because I knew those details wouldn't matter. When someone doesn't trust your judgment, they will always find a reason to question your choices, no matter how prepared you are. Later that evening, Daniel called. His voice was gentle, tired, rehearsed. He said he just wanted to make sure I felt supported, that if I needed help, it was okay to ask. You don't have to prove anything, Mom. That was what he said. But the subtext was clear. You've stepped out of place. Please return. I thanked him, told him I'd be fine, and changed the subject. We talked about Emily's school play, about the new roof they were installing. He didn't ask again, but the space between us grew heavier. On the night of the concert, I dressed slowly. I wore the red scarf Derek had given me for my 55th birthday. The one I hadn't worn in years, not since the colors in my life began to dull into beige. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who was nervous, yes, but also alive. Present. I dabbed perfume behind my ears, the same scent I used to wear when I was still teaching, jasmine and cedar. I left the apartment without saying a word to anyone. At the venue, I arrived 15 minutes early. The usher greeted me like an old friend. I showed her the ticket, and she smiled when she saw my name. Ruby said to make sure you had a good seat. She led me to the third row, center, and I sat down slowly, heart thudding. The room filled around me. Young couples, retirees, a group of college students taking notes. No one looked at me with pity. No one asked if I needed help. I was just another face in the audience, equal, whole. When Ruby came out, the applause was immediate. But it wasn't until midway through the second set that something shifted. She paused between songs, took a sip of water, and then said, "This next one is for someone here tonight. She knows who she is." Her eyes found mine again. No smile, just a quiet acknowledgement. Some people show up for the music. Some are the music. Then she began to sing. The song was Skylark, a complicated piece full of longing and grace. I had taught it to students before, but never sung it myself. As she moved through the melody, I felt tears prick at the corner of my eyes. Not because I was sad, but because I was being given something rare. Recognition. Not as a relic, not as a guest, not as a responsibility, but as a soul with its own resonance. When she finished, I clapped. Not early this time, but with fullness, with pride. And this time, I was not alone. The room followed. The applause swelled around me like a tide. When I returned home, the ticket stub was still in my coat pocket, slightly damp from my palm. I set it beside the letter she had sent and felt something lift in my chest. A kind of quiet defiance. Not loud, not angry, but firm. I would not return to silence. Not because I had something to prove, but because I had finally remembered I had a voice. And I wasn't going to apologize for using it. After the second concert, something shifted. Not outside, not in the eyes of my family or the tone of their messages, but within me. And that was the more powerful change, the more dangerous kind of shift, the kind that doesn't announce itself with fireworks or confrontation, but seeps into your bones and begins to rewrite the way you move through the world. It started the next morning, quietly, with the decision to sit at the kitchen table in the sunlight rather than on the couch with the television humming in the background, and with the way I spread jam on my toast slowly, like it mattered how the knife moved, like it was for someone important. I wasn't rushing, not because I had nowhere to be, but because I finally felt I had the right to occupy my own time. And that's not a small thing for a woman who has lived decades being measured by how useful, how agreeable, how available she is to others. That day, I took out my music books. Not the new ones with glossy covers and simplified arrangements, but the old, spine-cracked ones I had carried through every move, the ones with Derek's notes in the margins and smudged fingerprints from students, long grown, and I set them on the table with care. I flipped through them slowly, pausing at every handwritten marking, every penciled suggestion. I ran my finger over Derek's looping script. "Let it breathe," he had written next to a Chopin piece, and I smiled. I hadn't read those words in over 20 years, but they felt fresh, like he'd just whispered them to me across the kitchen. I pulled out my phone, not to check for messages from Daniel or Carla, because I knew there wouldn't be any, but to look up the number of the storage facility where my piano was sleeping. The woman on the other end remembered me. I could hear it in her voice. "You still playing?" she asked casually, like it wasn't the most loaded question someone could ask me. I told her I wanted to come by, maybe schedule a delivery to bring it back. "To your apartment?" she asked. "I thought they didn't allow heavy instruments." I told her I'd figure something out, and I meant it. For the first time in years, I meant it. That evening I called my building manager. His name is Frank, and he always wears vests even in summer, and smells faintly of pipe smoke. I asked him again, calmly but clearly, about the wall between my living room and the tiny utility alcove that served no real purpose except to house a crooked mop and a dusty fire extinguisher. "If that wall came down," I said, "just that little one, I could fit the piano right here by the window. It wouldn't block anything. I'd even give up the recliner." Frank sighed, said he'd have to check, said it wasn't usual. I said I'd wait. But this time, I didn't wait like someone begging for scraps. I waited like someone who knew what they were worth. Over the next few days, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took walks without destinations. I didn't use them to count steps or lower cholesterol. I wandered. I looked into shop windows and studied the way the light hit the awnings of old bookstores. I stopped at a park bench and watched two women in their 60s play chess under a tree without speaking, just tapping pieces like they'd known each other long enough to skip conversation. I imagined myself there, tapping the bishop forward, not because it would win the game, but because I liked the sound. That's the kind of thought I had now. Slow, soft thoughts that didn't need to justify themselves. I saw a flyer at the library for a local music group, retired musicians, hobbyists, people who still have sound in their fingers, the tagline said. They met on Thursdays in the back of a community center that smelled like soup and old hymnals. I took a copy of the flyer, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my coat pocket. I didn't go right away. I just wanted to know it was there. That was enough for the moment. To know there were people still gathering, still practicing, still making noise for the joy of it. On Sunday, I made soup. Not the kind from a box, but real soup with leeks and barley and leftover chicken I'd shredded with my own fingers. I played music while it simmered. Ruby's album, which I'd downloaded the night after her performance. Her voice filled my little apartment the way silence used to, and I moved through the space as if I belonged there. That night, I sat with a bowl of soup and the flyer still in my pocket, and I said aloud, not to anyone, but to the air, "I remember who I am." And I did. I remembered. The next morning, I called the number on the flyer. A woman answered with a raspy voice and a laugh that came too quickly, like she hadn't expected the phone to ring. "You play?" she asked. "Piano," I said. "Used to teach." She chuckled. "Used to is still usable. Come Thursday. Bring a piece you love." I hung up and sat back in my chair. I wasn't nervous, not exactly, but I was aware of the muscles in my hands, aware of the way my voice had sounded on that call. Steady, not shy. I ran my hands over the table like it was the cover of a piano, and I thought about the years I'd spent convincing myself that I didn't miss it, that it was too late, that I didn't have anything left worth sharing. What a lie that had been. What a small, sad lie. When Thursday came, I dressed in my best navy sweater and ironed slacks. I took the bus instead of asking for a ride. I carried my sheet music in a tote bag and a tin of shortbread cookies wrapped in wax paper. I arrived early and sat in the back of the room until someone noticed me. The woman who answered the phone, her name was Judith, came over and shook my hand with both of hers. "You must be Margaret," she said. "We saved you a spot by the good piano." I played second. I didn't play perfectly. My left hand fumbled once, and I forgot a transition in the middle of the second movement. But no one laughed. No one winced. When I finished, Judith clapped softly and said, "You've still got your own voice. It's in the way you hold the silence before you start." That compliment did something to me. It didn't puff me up. It settled me. Like I'd just found an old photograph and remembered the name of the person in it. That night, I didn't call anyone to tell them. I didn't post it. I didn't share the news. I simply sat at home, opened my music book again, and began to mark it up with a pencil, the way I used to when life was full of sound. I wasn't making a comeback. I wasn't chasing youth. I was returning to a room inside myself that had never been locked, only abandoned. And as I filled the margins with notes and reminders, as I wrote, "Let it breathe," in the corner of the page, I knew I had started breathing too. Not for them, not for praise, not even for healing, but because I was here. And finally, I was enough for me. It didn't happen all at once, but like a slow fog rolling in, the resistance from my family began again. Quieter this time, but more insistent, as if they had learned restraint. Or maybe as if they knew that overt confrontation would stir more defiance than compliance. I had returned from that Thursday music gathering, feeling softer, more attuned to my own rhythm. But the moment I walked into my apartment on Friday night, I could sense the pull of expectations tugging me sideways, reminding me of who I was supposed to be, not who I had finally begun to remember I was. That evening, just after I placed the graying flyer for the music group gently back on my table, the phone rang. The number said home, but I already knew who it would be. "Mom," Daniel began in that gentle voice he reserves for unavoidable, delicate truths. "We're worried again." A single sentence, but weighted with the years of silent judgments that preceded it. My stomach twisted, not with guilt, but with an odd ache of recognition, the ache of being held too lightly or too tightly, depending on what others thought was safe. "You're pushing yourself," he continued, and I recalled how, when I was young, I used to push for notes in songs until they floated on air with clarity and fullness, But when I pushed now to walk, to attend, to play, to claim space, his voice wavered. It's just... And then he paused, as though the rest of the sentence wouldn't come right. It was as though they had spent months painting the lines of the cage softly with pastel tones, and now their edges were beginning to show again. On Saturday, a card arrived from Carla. I recognized the handwriting immediately. The big, looping letters that had once delighted me when she was a child experimenting with cursive in her notebooks, before life shifted and softened her again into the shape of someone careful and unassuming. Inside was a store-bought card printed with flowers and the words, "Thinking of you, hoping you're doing well." Beneath, in her handwriting, a note that read, "We missed you at Emily's game yesterday. She asked after you. Hope you'll be back for holiday dinner next week. Let me know. Love, Carla." I held the card, carefully, as though it might dissolve if I squeezed it too hard. I felt the edge of shame brush across my chest as though I had broken a rule by being absent. But I did not show up at Emily's game because I chose to take my own rhythm that week, to play again, to remember who occupied my skin outside the roles they had assigned. I carried the card with me to bed that night, laid it on the nightstand beside the ruby letter, the ticket stub, the soup-stained flyer, and the quiet conviction that had grown there. Sunday rolled into Monday. I went to the class again. Someone mentioned a small gig at a coffee shop. Liked the idea of hearing me play something there. It was modest, maybe even insignificant, but I felt a thrill at the possibility, a soft glow in my chest that had nothing to do with expectation, just the memory of keys under fingertips and the sound emerging fluidly, gently, on its own. I didn't rush. I didn't ask permission. I simply wrote the note on my calendar and let it rest there. Tomorrow. That night at dinner, he brought it up again. He said it was late, the coffee shop, and even if it wasn't, the city wasn't as safe as it used to be for people my age traveling alone. "What about the weather?" he asked, an unexpected angle, as though the forecast could be evidence against me. I fixed him with steady eyes. "I'll be fine," I said softly. I did not say for me, but I meant it. I had earned the right not to ask. On Wednesday, the day before the gig, I told the building manager again about the wall removal. I did not couch my request in apologies or pleas. I described the piano's return, the space I needed, how I would manage it safely. He didn't say yes right away, but he didn't say no, which to me is just as good in these circumstances. I felt a strength I hadn't felt in decades, not because I had changed in the world, but because I had begun to orient myself by a different star. My heartbeat, not their comfort. That afternoon, I wrote to Ruby again. A short note, just a thank you for the invitation to the group, to the coffee shop possibility, to the impulse that opened again in me. I didn't ask for more attention. I simply let her know that what she did, singing that night, did more than flatten a room with admiration. It built something within me. I slept poorly. The anxiety wasn't fear, exactly. It was the deep hum of possibility, the tension of emergence, the feeling that whatever came next would not be small. When I woke before dawn, I made tea and sat on my balcony, watching the pale light seep across the buildings and the sky turning from black to indigo. I breathed slowly, as though inhaling a word into myself, a word that had been suppressed by years of kindness that wasn't mine, of expectations that weren't soft, of roles that never fit. I took the bus to the coffee shop that evening. The ride wove through my memories. Streets I'd walked with Derek, corners where Emily had learned to ride her bike, the grocery store where I used to bump carts with neighbors, exchanging smiles. When I got off, the area felt familiar yet new, as if I'd never visited in this frame of mind, this calm insistence on being visible. Inside the shop, a few people were gathered. Friends from the music group, an aging jazz bassist, a young poet reading. They greeted me by name. I breathed into the space. My turn came, and I sat at the piano that stood in the corner, polished and ready. I played Skylark again because it was the memory of longings felt and rhythms reclaimed, and maybe because it was still mine. My fingers trembled briefly, not with fear, but with recognition, the shape of a note that I hadn't forgotten but had been afraid to remember. And when I reached the final chord, the room breathed with me, as though they knew the way the piano had felt like a distant place and now was home again. "That was beautiful," someone said, and their voice rested across the room, a benediction I didn't expect but didn't resist. I packed up quietly, the applause still soft in my mind, my heart steady. But when I stepped outside, I felt a twitch in the air, as though something important was stretching. The cool evening air felt kind of like promise. I walked to the bus stop without thinking of the route, just letting myself move, feeling every step as presence, as purpose. I stepped on the bus, found a seat by the window, and didn't silence the conductor. When he laughed and said, "Nice night for music," I just nodded. Not because I wasn't used to being pitied, but because I wasn't here to be safe anymore. I was here to be myself. That night, I unpacked my music bag, the piano ticket, the letter, the card from Carla. I laid them out on the table as pieces of a map I had been following without realizing. And I realized how desperately I had wanted to fit the map someone else drew for me. But what I was feeling now, the pull of seasons of my own design, was something to follow, not resist. The second escalation wasn't violent or loud. It was soft, insistent, incremental, like a creek wearing away stone over time. It was the lingering echo of regained space. It was hearing someone say, "That was beautiful," and not asking for permission to believe it. It was returning from a gig that no one had sanctioned and feeling the ground shift beneath the piano again. It was realizing that music, my music, is not a pastime or a gesture, but part of the structure of me. And that structure, finally, was growing stronger. Not because others had acknowledged it, but because I had. And for the first time in too many years, that was enough. The letter arrived 2 days after the coffee shop performance, tucked in a cream envelope with no return address. But I recognized the handwriting before I even slid my thumb under the flap. It was Carla's. Her letters always looked like someone trying to write beautifully under pressure, rounded and careful, but slightly tight, as though the pen had been held a little too firmly. Inside were 3 pages of lined stationery, beginning with Margaret, and not Mom, or even Dear. That detail alone made my stomach harden. The contents were a quiet storm. Worry, thinly veiled reprimand, the word concern used 4 times in different contexts, and a paragraph that danced around the idea that perhaps I was getting swept up in something that may not reflect your long-term well-being. She didn't mention Ruby by name, but she did refer to public performances, unfamiliar social circles, and the kind of people who mean well, but don't understand how fragile life can become after a certain age. I read it 3 times. Each time, I felt the heat rising, not the heat of anger, not yet, but something worse. The dull ache of being seen through a frosted window, misinterpreted, miscast, spoken about instead of spoken to. That evening, I didn't cook dinner. I poured myself a glass of ginger ale, sat at the table, and laid Carla's letter beside the others. Ruby's invitation, the coffee shop set list Judith had typed for me, even the flyer from the community music group that I still hadn't returned. All of them, small affirmations that my life, in this quiet little second act, was mine. I turned the radio on, low volume, jazz hour humming through the speakers, and I said aloud to no one, "I am not fragile." I said it again, slower this time. I let the word break apart in my mouth. Fragile, a word used like bubble wrap, like warning tape, a word people use when they want to keep you still. I am not fragile. I am angry. It wasn't sudden. I didn't throw anything or cry. The feeling came like a tide, not crashing, just undeniable. It started as pressure in my chest and settled behind my ribs like a forgotten piano chord, waiting to be played. I went to the drawer and pulled out the envelope with my old legal papers, the apartment lease, the letter of ownership for the Yamaha piano, the medical proxy I had signed long before anyone asked if I still remembered who I was. I read them all carefully. I reread them. Then I picked up a pen and began to write. Not to Carla, not to Daniel, not even to Emily. I wrote to a lawyer I had once known through Derek's firm, a man named Leon, who had sent a condolence card all those years ago. I had kept it, oddly enough, in a box with ribbons and dried flower petals and recipes I never meant to make again. I wrote to Leon asking for a meeting. I told him I was fine, not in danger, but I needed someone to confirm it officially. The letter was short and clear, and when I sealed it, I felt the same sense of resolution I had felt the first time I placed my hands back on the piano keys. 2 days later, the call came. Leon remembered me. His voice was gruff and kind, aged like good wood. We spoke for 20 minutes, maybe less. He asked if anyone had attempted legal control, financial or medical. I said no, not yet. But I knew the signs. I could feel the orbit tightening. He offered to draft a letter. Nothing aggressive, just something to assert that I was acting with full agency, that no further attempts to interfere would be welcome. Just a paper trail, he said, in case they start talking to banks, doctors, apartment boards. I thanked him. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. He didn't ask. That was the best part. He didn't ask. That weekend, I mailed my own letter to Carla. It was not cruel. I took no joy in writing it. But I had learned something in these past few weeks. Being quiet makes you invisible, but being kind without boundary makes you disappear. So I wrote what needed to be said. I told her I understood that her fear for me was real, but her version of love required my silence, that I would no longer participate in the version of our relationship where I was spoken over, softened down, or strategically left out of the frame. I told her that any future interactions would happen on my terms, not because I didn't love her, but because I had remembered how to love myself. I ended the letter simply, I am not a risk. I am not your lesson. I am a person, and I am not coming back to that small version of myself to make you more comfortable. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. I folded the letter, placed it in a blue envelope, and walked it to the post office myself. No bus. No ride. I wore my navy wool coat and my red scarf and walked through the chill morning like someone headed somewhere meaningful. And I was. Back home, I cleaned my apartment thoroughly. Not in a frenzy, just with purpose. I opened every window and let the air sweep through, as if I was exercising something. I rearranged the living room to make space for the piano. Frank had finally approved the wall adjustment. I would be getting the keys delivered next week. That night, I ate a simple meal, an omelet and toast, nothing poetic, and watched the kettle boil without distraction. I sat by the open window with a cup of real tea and breathed in the evening. A letter of legal affirmation on my desk, a piano on its way, a silence that no longer choked. On Sunday, Judith called. There was going to be a spring performance, a small community showcase. Just a few of us, she said. Would you like to play? I didn't hesitate. Yes. She laughed, delighted. I thought so. I hung up and immediately started flipping through sheet music. I didn't choose the flashy pieces, the ones meant to impress. I chose a quiet one. A slow, aching prelude I'd taught to dozens of students, but never played myself. I practiced it until the sun dipped below the buildings and the streetlights turned on. That night, I slept with the window cracked open and the sheet music beside my bed. I dreamed of nothing. Or maybe I did, but it wasn't filled with faces looking away from me or hands pushing mine down. It was a dream of a woman sitting at a piano in a room filled with light, playing not for applause, but because her fingers remembered, because her silence had ended. This, then, was the culmination, not of rage or revenge, but of clarity. Not the dramatic confrontation they might have expected, but a calm, deliberate act of naming myself. Not as a victim, not as someone misunderstood, but as someone complete. I had lived too long being patient, being accommodating, being grateful for breadcrumbs. Now I would bake my own bread, and I would not serve it to those who thought I owed them the recipe. They had told me, again and again, that they were just trying to help. They had built walls of worry, paved walkways of fear. But help is not control. Worry is not permission. And fear is not love. This time, I had written my name on the doorframe of my life with permanent ink, and I would not ask them to read it. I would not ask them to enter. They were welcome to come, if they knocked, if they asked, if they stayed quiet long enough to hear the music. But I had already opened the door. I had already walked through. The piano arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as the light began to slide across the living room floor in that slow, deliberate way that reminds you time doesn't need your permission to pass. The movers were efficient, polite, and slightly bemused by how meticulously I had cleared the space for it. I watched from the kitchen doorway as they unwrapped the cloth, adjusted the bench, wiped their hands against their trousers. When they left, I stood there a long moment, the room quieter than it had ever been, yet suddenly more alive. The piano was smaller than I remembered, but heavier in meaning now, the way something returns to you not as it was, but as what you've earned. I didn't play it right away. I sat beside it and laid my hand on the wood, closed my eyes, and felt a long thread reconnect, not to memory, but to presence, to self. Later that day, I placed a photo on top of the piano. Not of Derek, not even of Emily or the family in their younger, softer years, but of myself, at age 31, standing outside the conservatory where I once taught, my coat unbuttoned and my smile so certain it startled me when I saw it again. I hadn't remembered feeling that sure of anything then, but the image didn't lie. I set it there as a small reminder, not of what I'd lost, but of what had been inside me all along. I still had that face, that posture, that spine, even if softened by time. And now I had the voice to match it. Spring came quietly, in petals and damp wind. I attended every Thursday session with the music group, bringing ginger biscuits and new arrangements, laughing louder than I had in years. The performance Judith had planned was modest: folding chairs, coffee and paper cups, families chatting in the back. But I stood in front of them all and played my piece. The prelude came out of me like breath. I didn't tremble. I didn't rush. And when I finished, I didn't wait for applause. I simply bowed, looked up, and saw a woman in the back row, maybe 60, maybe 70, wiping the corner of her eye. Our eyes met. That was enough. I never received a reply to my last letter to Carla. Weeks passed, then a month. Daniel sent a brief message about taxes. Emily texted me once, a meme I didn't quite understand but appreciated for its sudden warmth. I didn't press for more. I had already reclaimed what was mine to reclaim. I no longer needed their permission to feel complete. One afternoon, I slipped a note under the door of the woman 2 floors below me, Helen, who had once told me she used to dance but hadn't, since her husband passed. I invited her for tea. She came wearing lipstick and a cautious smile. We talked about nothing for 3 hours, and when she left, she said, "Maybe next time I'll bring records." I nodded. "I have a record player," I said. It wasn't a metaphor, but it felt like one. Life didn't transform overnight. No great tidal wave of apology washed over me. But something settled. The space between who I had been and who I now allowed myself to be closed, like a well-worn book, finally finding its last page. The air in my apartment felt warmer, even when the windows were shut. I walked differently, not faster, but with more weight in my steps, more decision. And when people saw me, they no longer looked through me. Or perhaps they still did, but I no longer flinched when they did. Their blindness was not my burden anymore. Sometimes I still hear Carla's voice in my head, that careful tone she uses when she thinks she's being generous, but is really just trying to manage discomfort. I hear it and let it pass. I do not answer it anymore. Not aloud, and not inside myself. The most surprising part of this season of my life is not the piano, or the letter, or even Ruby's song. It's the way silence has changed shape. It used to feel like a verdict. Now it feels like breath. Like room. I am not afraid of it. I live inside it. And it holds me gently. If another woman were to ask me how it happened, how I changed, how I came back to myself, I would not tell her it was easy. I would not give her steps. I would say, one day, you will remember that you are not just a helper or a mother or a polite guest in your own body. One day, something will be said, cruel or careless, and instead of shrinking, you will stand very still and decide, no more. And then, slowly, you will begin again. And when you do, I'll be here, waiting, playing, alive.